of course, and a Director of the National Board of the RSL Australia. He brings decades of leadership in veteran advocacy and community service. He currently works with the European Engineering Organisation in Defence Business Development and Senior Project Management, contributing to major initiatives in maritime nuclear infrastructure and space regulatory programs. Brad will deliver an Anzac message reflecting on his family history and the experience of veterans then and today, titled RSL Yesterday, Today and Tomorrow. Welcome, Brad.
Just for those that may be thinking it, I'm not an engineer, I'm a project manager or a person who can herd cats pretty well. So, also, just so that you're aware, I was the previous Mayor of the City of Port Lincoln and the Police Commander for the western part of South Australia before I retired for the first of 8 times since. So, Steve Larkins, I was going to say did what he usually does. He rang me up and said, "Brad, I've got a deal for you. How would you like to come down and do a presentation on Anzac Day?" Because he's overseas. I've got a lot of time for Steve. He's an amazing man. And I thought, how can I justify the way that Steve would have presented in the past? And I thought, well, I can talk about the RSL yesterday, today and tomorrow, because whilst I'm not the expert on it, I've got a bit of knowledge, a little bit. Interweaved, I'll put a little bit of family history in there as well. We can laugh about things that I'll get into trouble with when I get home. So caveat. Before I begin, I want to make 3 things clear. Well, 4 actually. The first one is normally I don't read my speeches. Normally I'll just go straight into it. But this one I wanted to get in the right context, and I wanted to be able to put the points of view across accurately. So I'm speaking organisationally and not personally. Second, I may inadvertently miss some operations, campaigns or service categories, and it's not intentional. Third, what I'm presenting are my interpretations drawn from history, experience and reflection. Others may see parts of the story differently, and that's both expected and healthy. What I want to do today is talk through the evolution of the RSL, why it was created, when it worked well, when it struggled, and how it's now repositioning itself to remain a relevant, creditable organisation for veterans and government. And as I said, I'll probably bring some of my family stories into it. This is not about blame, it's about learning. World War I, so I'm going to take you back there now. So we're talking about 1918, at the end of the war. The shock and the scale and the limited preparedness of Australia as a country to our returned servicemen was outstanding in its poor approach. From the population of under 5 million, around 340,000 Australians enlisted, representing nearly 40% of eligible military-age men. In Australia, more than 54,000 of our people were killed. Over 155,000 were wounded. Many tens of thousands suffered long-term illnesses. Psychological injury was widespread, but completely and totally misunderstood. This contributed to significant understatements of real war-related injuries and veteran suffering that continued on beyond the battlefield. Within South Australia, the South Australian population in 1914 was 408,000. From South Australia alone, 35,000 soldiers mainly, sailors mainly, limited women enlisted in the First World War. More than 5,500 didn't come back, and around 15,000 more came home wounded, many of them permanently. In a state with fewer than 500,000 people, almost every community and family was touched by the war. You've just got to go to any regional area or any park in the city and you'll see a memorial. The reality was that demobilisation in 1918 occurred rapidly and largely simultaneously immediately after the war. Australia had no experience in managing reintegration at scale. Employment was scarce and women had entered the workforce. Soldier settlement schemes were often poorly planned, located on marginal land and unsupported. Some were pretty good though. The Riverland's a pretty good example up there. Veterans were publicly revered, but privately expected to resume normal life quickly and without complaint. The Repatriation Act of 1920 provided pensions and care, but often only after long, difficult claims processes driven by persistent advocacy. Well, nothing's changed there, I can tell you. So why the RSL was created? World War I and the crisis of return. By 1915 to 1916, Australia was entirely unprepared for the return of the wounded and traumatised servicemen from the First World War. Returned soldiers faced inadequate medical and rehabilitation services, limited and fragmented pension arrangements, and severe unemployment. There was only small, disconnected state-based welfare bodies. Most importantly, there was no unified national organisation capable of representing veterans' interests or compelling governments to accept long-term responsibility for repatriation and welfare. Remember, this is a young government that sent soldiers away to fight battles and then hadn't even thought about what's going to happen when they get back. Well, that hasn't changed either, although it's better than it used to be. So. State returned soldier associations recognised that there was a gap in capacity and capability. Meetings were held in Sydney and Melbourne in 1916, and these led to the creation of the national body of the RSL as you see today. It had three clear purposes: a unified national voice for veterans, pressure governments to deliver repatriation pensions and medical care, and to protect veterans from neglect, poverty and social marginalisation. The body then became known as the Returned Sailors and Soldiers Imperial League of Australia, which has now changed its name to Returned Services League Australia. By 1918, all states were members, and in the late 20s, the government formally recognised the League as the principal representative body of returned servicemen. The government was now listening. Because we had the single voice, they were there. The RSL during the war, in between the war years, became much stronger. Returned service people went into government, returned service people went into business, and there was a significant recognition of the need of our returned service people. By the time World War II came around, this is when the RSL model started to work at its best. The foundations had been laid post-World War I, and they'd moved into a situation where, again, we're at war. Again, the nation was being tested. But this time, Australia applied the lessons learned from World War I. By this time, the RSL was a strong, focused and influential organisation. Australia, with a population of about 7 million in 1940, had approximately 1 million people who served and around 575 returned post-1945. So notice I say people there because women were now being accepted into the services, and the Air Force, as well as the Navy and the Army, were now the three services. For Australia, more than 39,000 of our people were killed, and more than 30,000 were wounded, and probably more if you take into account the mental health aspects. Within South Australia, our population in 1940 was 600,000, and we had about 75,000 people who served in World War II. Because of the RSL lobbying and positioning, as well as other factors which included World War I veterans in government and positions of power, this time the demobilisation was planned and staged. Government accepted clear long-term responsibility for veteran welfare. The Department of Repatriation was expanded. That's the current Department of Veterans Affairs. Full employment was pursued by the government. The Commonwealth Reconstruction Training Scheme delivered free education and allowances for more than 300,000 veterans. Housing shortages and mental health stigma still persisted, but overall reintegration outcomes were far stronger after World War I. By this time, the RSL had become powerful, creditable, and a national organisation embedded in advocacy, employment, support, welfare and commemoration. The RSL federated model was working well with experienced leaders who understood the veteran communities, how government worked and how to get results from both. It was a powerful lobbying group that was being listened to by governments. Bit of a case study. Old Mick, I call him Old Mick, he enlisted in the 2nd AOF in 1941 at the age of 18. After training around Australia, he was posted to Darwin for 2 years, where he was present in the final 8 months of the Japanese bombing campaign. He later served on Moritai and Ambon, and at the war's end volunteered to serve with the Commonwealth Occupation Forces in Japan, where he remained for about 15 months. On returning to Australia, Mick became an active RSL member. Over time, he served as the President, Treasurer, Vice President and Secretary of his sub-branch, eventually becoming a life member. His focus was really on the RSL. I know Mick, he was my father-in-law. His focus was on the RSL and mateship, the exclusion of the old enemy, his anger, and really just the sub-branches where he felt safe with a shared identity and mutual support. He was an angry old bastard. Jesus, he was a hard bloke. I married his daughter. She's not upset her, actually. But this was the RSL at its strongest. This was a place where people felt safe that they could go. They had a shared experience. In World War II and World War I, the combat environment and the profile was completely different. It was extremely violent, extremely primitive, compared to where we are today. Mick's only outlet was to go to the RSL, get full with his mates and have fights. But he felt good about it. He tried picking fights with me too, but I used to run, so. But the RSL was its strongest element post-World War II. There were other combat environments, the Korean War. I won't go into those. But then what happened as time went on, Mick and his cohort of World War II veterans who were now in the positions of power within the RSL started to focus inward. There was a lot of infighting. On the horizon was the Vietnam War veterans. And this was a shock to people like Mick, who just couldn't understand it. As far as he was concerned, the Vietnam War wasn't a war. They just went over there and did whatever they did. I didn't agree with that perspective either. That was another time I went running from him. So from statistics, approximately 60 to 61,000 Australians served in Vietnam between 62 and 73. 521 Australians died as a result of the Vietnam War, and approximately 3,000 to 3,130 Australians were wounded. Vietnam marked a profound turning point for the country and the RSL. The war was politically divisive, conscription intensified opposition, and many Australians failed to separate the war from the soldiers who served. I'm sure with the generations that I see sitting out here, that those that did serve would have experienced that, and those that didn't would have understood what I'm talking about. Some veterans returned to public welcomes, many others returned quietly, discharged quickly, and dispersed without structured transition. Probably the worst thing you can do. Being on a ship or a plane one day with your colleagues, your veterans, your people that you've shared terrible things with, and the next day being told no one likes where you've been. As a matter of fact, they don't like you either. PTSD was poorly understood, and exposure to Agent Orange caused long-term harm and was initially denied by governments. Some Vietnam veterans felt welcomed by the RSL sub-branches and others did not, particularly in the metropolitan areas. Veteran-led organisations aside from the RSL emerged, including organisations like the Vietnam Veterans Association and the National Servicemen's Association. These guys couldn't get what they needed out of the RSL, which was advocacy and wellbeing support, so they developed their own organisations. The truth is that the RSL didn't lack goodwill, it lacked the readiness for a new kind of war and a new kind of veteran. So let's roll back as a case study to old Mick. Mick's still a power within the RSL, he's still on the executive, and in walks Des, my friend that I served with. Des Des walked into the RSL, and Mick, being a World War II veteran, said, "You never fought in a war, you never had anything to do, you just put the uniform on and didn't do anything." And I'm going to be very polite, Mick told him to piss off. Well, Des, who used to be my sergeant actually in the army, Des said, "Right, that's it," and never set foot across the doorstep of the RSL for another 25 years. So Des was a little bit like Mick. He was pretty strong, but he knew that he didn't have to worry about hanging around the RSL. He'd go to the other organisations. And eventually, as time would go on, that cohort of Vietnam veterans did go back to the RSL. They did go into the situation where all of a sudden the old World War II blokes were gone and the Vietnam veterans had walked into the executive side of things. So, tell me if I'm going too long, by the way. So, between 87 and 98, there was a bit of a strategic drift for the country where there wasn't much going on from an operations perspective. There was operations, but not a huge amount. But what happened during that period leading up to 1998 from the Vietnam War era is that government policy and defence policy changed. It became more professionalised. They were writing white papers and green papers and red papers and all sorts of things. They didn't rely on the RSL to advise them on defence anymore because they could do it themselves. The influence that we had from the World War II veterans in government had gone, largely. Government didn't need the RSL anymore, and the RSL was too thick to realise that they were walking off the plank. At the same time, our World War II veterans aged out, and the Vietnam veterans, numerically the largest cohort, assumed senior roles within the RSL. The RSL became uneven and reactive, while the internal governance and structural issues, which is infighting if you like, became the prominent thing. There was a loss of focus. So from 1998 to the present, we've been in a high tempo, high complexity area of operations. From 98 through to now, we've had over nearly 90,000 Australians serving in operations. They've been in East Timor, Afghanistan, Iraq, operations against ISIL, Solomon Islands, humanitarian deployments, Bougainville, New Guinea, I could keep going. Out of those 90,000 Australians, approximately 60 were killed and about 400 to 500 were wounded. Now, because I'm sweeping over with numbers, don't think that they're not important. They're just easier for me to go through. The casualty rate was well under 1%, but it wasn't reflecting a lack of danger, but a fundamentally different style of warfare, force protection and medical evacuation compared to earlier wars. Modern casualties were more often invisible, but no less real. Hence, the concept of PTSD, what used to be called shell shock, which used to be called trench shock or whatever it was, all the same type of thing, just impacting our people in a way where it's recognised. So this period has seen significantly higher rates of PTSD, complex moral injury and elevated, elevated suicide risk. From about 2005 onwards, many groups, peacekeepers, women veterans, younger post-Afghanistan veterans, felt underrepresented within the traditional RSL structures. Many sub-branches could not change from the old ORs or sergeants' boozers image, or the mess image. There was no acceptance of the need for change to adapt to the requirements of a new generation of Australians, and most definitely the new generation of veterans. It wasn't so much a lack of understanding, it was a lack of understanding for the need for change. Remember, I'm talking about an organisation here. So we had the Royal Commission into suicides in the ADF, a bit of a pivot point, a bit of a point where the RSL recognised that its focus really should be on advocacy, well-being, employment, not only just commemorations and the due diligence with our sub-branches, it's got to be focused on our veteran community. So one of the things, whilst we had the ADF Royal Commission into suicides, the point I need to raise is that more than 80% of our veterans contribute to our community and culture in positive ways. Most have families, are successful at studies and employment, and are great employees. Post the Royal Commission, the government had, I believe, a new focus on where we were going and what we were doing. So where's the RSL now and where are we going? The key point is the RSL has heard the message. Veterans organisations lose legitimacy not when wars end, but when they stop listening. We had stopped listening as an organisation. But we've been on the road back for the last couple of years. We're a large organisation. We've got about 153,000 members. And if you put a 2.4 multiplier on it for whatever stats you like for influence, that's a big voting body. We've understood that with that membership and our 1,100 sub-branches, that means 1,100 separate buildings that we've got throughout Australia, we have a capacity to influence government policy on veterans and defence. And that's where we're going. We must evolve quickly to survive, and more importantly, to support today's veteran community, we must corporatise and become business orientated. It's pretty hard for a big charity to get a federated group of people to say, oh, we better pay the board so that we've got professionalism there. But we're there. Our focus is now on advocacy, wellbeing, employment, commemoration and the due diligence and governance of our sub-branches. We have a consensus board at the national side and we are now starting to move. The cogs are moving in the right direction. So we're starting to look with Legacy, RSL Care and TPI in this state so that we can stand shoulder to shoulder and say we will support the veteran community with our each organisational specialties. So, in closing, the RSL exists because veterans matter. Not as symbols, not as memories, but as people and voices whose service continues long after uniforms are put away. If we keep listening, adapting and acting with integrity, the RSL will remain what it has always meant to be, Australia's enduring national advocate for those who have served. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. That was particularly poignant for me. My father was in World War II and was president of his RSL sub-branch, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Any questions for Brad? Guy?
Thank you, Brad, for your address today. Thank you. My recent question is, I spent the morning listening to discuss what anything I'll start. Try again. Yes, you can hear me. I spent this morning listening to the state assessment panel. They're dealing with the issue of the War Widows home on Fullerton Road and Hewitt Avenue. There are 220 people, residents of my community, of which I'm a councillor, who are speaking against this abominable retirement complex that they want to build next to Lady Vasey's house, where the women raise money to provide accommodation for the war widows. They have been shifted on by ACH and they want to build a beautiful retirement complex on this inappropriate space in our neighbourhood. So I would hope the RSL has done some advocacy for these women and this space. Secondly, oh gosh, get me started. On another hat, thank you, on another hat with National Trust Council, I'm appalled at the government selling off Keswick to the highest bidder and other defence establishments in South Australia and around the nation. Who's not to know that they might be needed in the near future, those spaces within our cities? Yep. So what is RSL doing as advocacy for these two matters, which are really important in our community? Thank you.
So I'll roll the answer for both questions together. The first one, because I don't have a complete understanding about the first one, I know that the War Widows organisation has now closed down in South Australia. And I mean, in a sense, it's good because it means that there are no war widows at this stage. So I will say that we have to ensure that we move on, that if there's facilities that aren't suited to what our needs are in today's experience, we've got to take that into account. So rolling that into the defence estate movement, RSL Australia has put forward a paper and has lobbied strongly in government at national level to get a Senate inquiry up and going into the defence estatement. I'm trying to think of the right word, acquittal or whatever it is. So on a national level, we've got our heads together and said, right, we have to do a submission here, and we're doing it by, I think, of the 68 estates that they're trying to move on. Now, you've got to take into account, we've got a contemporary defence organisation that isn't using a lot of these facilities to the level that they should. Now, I think that's because they're probably out of date, but the fact is you've got to take into account is community access and heritage as well. So that's always going to be a concern. In the case of South Australia, where we're looking at Keswick Barracks, for example, 3 years ago, this was a done deal where the state government swapped land that they owned at Osborne so that AUKUS could go forward down there. That's an example to me. I mean, I lost Fort Largs, I lost Theberton Police Barracks, and now I'm losing Keswick Barracks. Everywhere that I've done my work and learned my trade or my profession, they're all gone. But the thing that I understand is that the appropriate heritage buildings at Keswick are going to be maintained. I don't know if it's 1 or 2 or 3, but the key element there is we need AUKUS for a contemporary defence profile. So if they swung a deal on it, so be it. There was pressure from National about Keswick, and I said, look, it's already done. It's 3 years down the track. It's already done. There's no sense in fighting something that we're not going to win. But we're losing Hampstead Barracks as well, and we're losing half of Warradale, and we're losing Woodside. You know, one of the things that I put forward in the paper on that was that from a reserve forces perspective, we needed the ability to expand and mobilise very, very quickly. But the paper that was put forward in 23 about defence acquittal was that they're not being used 24 hours, 7 days a week, so therefore they're redundant. Now that's an economist or an accountant's perspective. The reality is that we need to have these bases around Adelaide, and we need to have the capacity to expand. So I'm sorry I couldn't talk too much more about war widows.
I think we might be out of time for questions now. Sorry, David. I'm sure Brad will hang around and have a chat afterwards. Brett? Sorry, what was that?
What do you want me to do?
Sure.
So I know time's very precious, but I'll just say this is a bit of a plug for the organisation. So the 26th AFL Anzac appeal round promises to be the biggest national support of veterans in the history of the RSL's partnership with the AFL. For the first time, all 18 AFL teams will wear the Anzac appeal logo on their Guernseys. The RSL sub-branches across Australia will also be involved in the round with a volunteer collecting donations to appeals to the Anzac appeal across 6 of the weekend's games. Most particularly in South Australia here, the Anzac Day home matches provide a wonderful opportunity to reinforce the purpose of the day and to commemorate our fallen. When Port Adelaide play Geelong here on Saturday, there will be collectors all through the area here for the Anzac appeal, and you'll see people selling poppies around the place, usually soldiers. I think they got soldiers and airmen and some sailors now doing it. So you'll see them dotted around town. Please, if you can, make a donation. If you don't come up against anyone like that, there's the anzacappeal.com, I think it is, or something along those lines. Just go for a search through Google and you'll find it, and you can make your donation there. Thanks. That's my plug.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad. Your presentation today has enabled us to come together and support the ideals of Rotary. There's a small token of our appreciation. Please stand and thank Brad.